The project was developed under Columbia Pictures, the same company that co-distributed 1941 and who distributed used cars. And they put it in turnaround, after which Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale rewrote it a couple of times, but it was still rejected by every major studio in Hollywood for being too light and not sexual enough for teen comedy. And they suggested they take it to Disney, who actually rejected it for being too adult, because it had a mother fall in love with her son, showing that it was either too light for people or too heavy. It was either too child-friendly or too adult. And they could get Steven Spielberg to executive produce it and get it greenlit that way, but since they'd worked previously under him and flopped under him, Robert Zemeckis thought that this would make it seem as though they only got work because they were pals with Steven Spielberg, and that if this film was produced by him and flopped, they would seem even more dependent, and he might never be able to direct a movie again. So he decided not to have Steven Spielberg involved, getting one producer who was interested not to go through with the project. So Robert Zemeckis decided to work on a less risky project on his own, without Steven Spielberg involved, and even without Bob Gale, thereby getting a status on his own. And he did a directors for hire job working on someone else's picture, which he didn't write or produce, he just directed it, which was Romancing the Stone, for which he was hired by star and producer Michael Douglas. And he put really a lot of energy into this film, closely working with Michael Douglas, and had the script refined by multiple uncredited script doctors. And he created very fast location shooting and ambitious camera movement and ambitious special visual effects, and he hired the wonderful Anna Silvestri to create a really deep score. And Romancing the Stone was an outstanding masterpiece and completely flawless, and thereby his first refined and his first balanced film. And Robert Zemeckis had thereby really perfectionized his skills and matured as a filmmaker. And it was a huge box office hit, grossing $86,572,238 on a $10 million budget, and it did very well in home media and in rentals, making over $46 million in rentals alone. And it got great critical reviews, by some being considered one of the best films of 1984, got great audience reactions, many fans, and it got a fantastic reputation and an immense cultural impact. And it got nominated for and won many awards, including winning the Golden Globe Award for Best Motion Picture, a musical or comedy, the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress, musical or comedy, the Los Angeles Film Critics Association Award for Best Actress, the Golden Reel Award for Best Sound Editing, the Stuntman Award for Most Spectacular Stunt, and it got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Film Editing and an American Cinema Award for Best Edited Feature Film, and the Writers Guild of America Award for Best Original Screenplay. So he then became a very high-profile director, and that proved himself talented, alone without Steven Spielberg or even Bob Gale, and could now easily work together with Bob Gale, and now with a reputation of his own, work together with Steven Spielberg as partners instead of as an apprentice or someone who needed his help. And he had generated a lot of interest in the Back to the Future script in Hollywood, and especially with him directing it. And now he could get Steven Spielberg to produce it, and they had the project set up at Universal Studios. And especially now that Steven Spielberg had directed the E.T. the Extraterrestrial, making him one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, and making the fantasy and sweet sentimental film genres very bankable. And due to his success and his ties with Steven Spielberg, they got a rather high budget of $40 million. So it was a very ambitious project, and through hard work, persistence, and starting low and slowly gaining success, it was greenlit and given a high budget, and therefore it was a very ambitious production, and the script really got the backing it truly deserved. And now Steven Spielberg would be co-executive producer, as well as the great Kathleen Kennedy would be co-executive producer, and the genius Frank Marshall would be co-executive producer. And both had worked together with Steven Spielberg before and were a great team, and they gave a lot of instructions and added to the project. But Steven Spielberg did respect Robert Zemeckis' vision and allowed him to truly lead the project, so he was a true help, but he didn't force any of his vision on Steven Spielberg. And Frank Marshall also served as a second unit director as well, thereby allowing for a very talented person to do the second unit work, thereby meaning that none of the scenes in the film got put second place. And Steven Spielberg is easily one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, since he worked on many amazing films. He co-story wrote and directed The Sugarland Express, he directed Jaws, story wrote, screenwrote and directed Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He executive produced I Wanna Hold Your Hand. He directed 1941. He executive produced Hugh Scars. He directed Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. He story wrote, co-screenwrote, co-produced, and uncreditedly co-directed Poltergeist. He co-produced and directed E.T. the Extraterrestrial. He directed Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He executive produced Gremlins. He co-produced and directed The Color Purple. He story wrote, co-executive produced, and uncreditedly co-directed The Goonies. He executive produced An American Tail. He co-produced and directed Empire of the Sun. He co-primarily executive produced The Land Before Time. He executive produced Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He directed Indiana Jones The Last Crusade, and he co-executive produced the first sequel, the sequel Back to the Future Part 2. He co-executive produced the second sequel, the prequel Back to the Future Part 3. He executive produced Gremlins 2: The New Batch. He produced Cape Fear. He directed Jurassic Park. He co-produced and directed Schindler's List. He produced Twister. He executive produced Men in Black. He co-produced and directed Amistad. He executive produced The Mask of Zorro. And of course, he co-produced and directed Saving Private Ryan. He executive produced Jurassic Park 3. He executive produced Men in Black 2. Co-produced and directed Catch Me If You Can. He executive produced The Legend of Sorrow. He directed War of the Worlds. He directed Munich. He produced Flags of Our Fathers. He produced Letters from Iwo Jima. He produced Transformers. He directed Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He produced Transformers: The Revenge of the Fallen. He produced The Lovely Bones and produced the 2010 True Grit remake and adaptation. And Frank Marshall was a fantastic filmmaker as well, who had also worked on many great films. Since he produced Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, he executive produced Poltergeist. He executive produced Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He executive produced The Color Purple. He co-executive produced The Goonies. He executive produced Emperor of the Sun. He executive produced Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He co-secondarily executive produced The Land Before Time. He co-executive produced the first sequel, the sequel Back to the Future Part 2. He executive produced Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He co-executive produced the second sequel, the prequel Back to the Future Part 3. He executive produced The Sixth Sense. He executive produced Signs. He executive produced The Bourne Identity. He executive produced The Bourne Supremacy. He executive produced The Bourne Ultimatum, and executive produced Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and executive produced The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And Kathleen Kennedy was as well a wonderful filmmaker and had worked on many great films also, since she as well produced Indiana Jones: The Raiders of the Lost Ark, associatedly produced Poltergeist. She produced E.T. the Extraterrestrial. She executive produced Gremlins. She associatedly produced Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. She co-executive produced The Goonies. She executive produced The Young Sherlock Holmes. She produced An American Tail. She produced Empire of the Sun. She co-secondarily executive produced The Land Before Time. She executively produced Who Framed Roger Rabbit. She co-executive produced the first sequel, the prequel Back to the Future Part 2. She executive produced Gremlins to the New Batch. She co-executive produced the second sequel, the prequel Back to the Future Part 3. She executive produced Cape Fear. She executive produced Schindler's List. She produced Jurassic Park. She produced Twister. She produced The Sixth Sense. She produced Jurassic Park 3. She produced War of the Worlds. She produced The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and produced Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as well. So this is just an endless amount of great films. All these three people have worked on together. It are numerous dozens of just downright amazing masterpieces these people all worked on, and these three people together all were there not to make the film, but to add to the vision of two other geniuses, thereby creating a collaboration of 5 geniuses, thereby making people with an endless amount of experience and field work in the Hollywood industry work on this film, to all combine their talents, and just people with an endless filmography of great film put their best work all together united into this film, creating a true masterpiece. And all these 3 filmmakers are fantastic, and all 3 work together a lot in the past and had done so very well, and had worked together a lot very well in general. And Steven Spielberg had already worked with Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale before, and Frank Marshall would work with Robert Zemeckis in the future again, and Kathleen Kennedy would also go on to work with Robert Zemeckis. So we had a team of 6 great filmmakers, including 4 masterful ones, all who could work together perfectly. And the studio still supervised the project a bit, with studio executive Sidney Sheinberg making some suggestions to the script, and making some great suggestions like removing silly things and replacing them with more genuine elements. like having dogs, Chimp be a dog, which they respected, but Robert Zemeckis' status. And Steven Spielberg did shield them a bit from too much interference with when the studio executive wanted to change the title of Back to the Future, because no film had ever had the word future in the title, and wanted it to replace the spaceman from Pluto that Steven Spielberg acted like he thought was a joke, causing him to drop the whole thing. So there was a good balance between studio interference and creative freedom. And Robert Zemeckis directed it along with Bob Gale co-producing it, along with Neil Kenton to co-produce it as well. And what is also great is that even though Robert Zemeckis from the writing team is the director, Bob Gale is co-producer, meaning they have a mostly equal influence, and both writers, both of the creators, are involved with and supervise the production, with Bob Gale being very involved in the casting, set design, special visual effects, and editing. And Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale were both very ambitious in the casting process. They really considered the process, and they wanted to cast Michael J. Fox in the lead, but since he was committed to Family Ties, they tried to cast Thomas Howell and Eric Stoltz. And Robert Zemeckis thought that the former was great, but the studio executive wanted the latter and said that if it didn't work, they could recast the part and redo the whole film, and he would raise the budget accordingly. So soon Robert Zemeckis agreed to do it and cast him, but he soon realized that Eric Stoltz had been miscast because he was too humorless and didn't get Robert Zemeckis' instructions. He couldn't take comedic directions well, and he was very out of character, and they were going to drop and recast him and discuss the budget to be raised from 14 million to 17 million. And eventually Robert Zemeckis could arrange with the producer of Family Ties that Fox could appear as long as his main priority was Family Ties. And Fox loved the script and decided to not 20th Century Fox, Michael J. Fox loved the script and decided to work at night to shoot the film, barely sleeping for months, only sleeping 2 hours for at least six consecutive months. And he was very funny and so he was really hardworking and dedicated for the role, and he completely fitted it. He was funny and relaxed like the character, so they got a really devoted actor who perfectly fitted the part. And they cast Pearl Welliner because he was really stressful and awkward, and had the body movement as well as the face and voice. And Christopher Lloyd was cast by Neil Kenton, who really was comedic and warm and intense, enough in his facial expressions. And Leah Thompson was cast because she was really sweet and talented and obedient. And Tom F. Wilson was cast because he was strong, imposing, and because the previous choice, J.J. Cohen, didn't seem physically imposing enough compared to Stoltz. Although he might have been cast if he auditioned while Fox was cast, because he was bigger than Fox. But since Fox wasn't around yet and Stoltz was in the role, Thomas Wilson got cast. Laura Harlin was originally cast as Marty's girlfriend Jennifer, but after Waltz was let go, they decided she would be too tall to play against Fox, and was fired, and she didn't have the chance to shoot a single scene before she was let go of.